I always loved reading. Ever since I was a child, I used to read books, and I was exposed to the English language ever since I was in elementary school. I remember my mom used to buy me many books, and many children's books, and many books that had pictures in them, and that is somewhat the reason why I speak good English now. But as the years went by, my love for reading grew even more and more. I mean, in contrary with other children at school, I loved actually attending school and going to school. I used to cry the day I was sick and I was forced to stay at home. But I loved reading, I loved memorizing, I loved revising, and whatever had to do with reading. But my love for reading began again, and I fell in love with reading again when I went to college. And because I specialized in something I loved so much and it was so dear to me, I specialized in English literature and language, I got introduced to many beautiful books, and the teachers that came for us were the reasons that we fell in love with those books. They made those books exciting. They connected it to real life. So during college, I fell in love with reading books again. And I somewhat learned that books aren't just something material that you can spend your money on. They're actually worthy of spending your money on, because you can benefit a lot from books. But one specific book that I want to talk about is this. I read this in my senior year, which was the 4th stage. This is The Color Purple by Alice Walker. This book, I mean, some books you read and you can't get them out of your mind. This is one of them. And I just want to do a quick recap and a quick review. The novel is very long. I obviously can't. I might as well just made an audiobook and read the whole novel, because there isn't something that I don't like about it. But I'm just going to choose some specific highlights, and I'm going to share my thoughts about those with you. I just want to talk about the writer. Now, Alice Walker wrote this book in 1982, and the themes that this book handles are very controversial, because it talks about many things that might be considered obscene for some. It even contains like obscene language. But however, Alice Walker, for this specific book, won the Pulitzer Prize and the American Book Award, which just goes to show how an amazing book it is. Now, just for a few things, I would like to share some paragraphs. It says in the preface, obviously I can't read everything, I just chose some highlights. It says, examining the journey from the religious back to the spiritual that I spent much of my adult life prior to writing it seeking to avoid. Worshipper of nature by the age of 11. Now, one of the most important themes that this book handles is spirituality. And we're going to see that in the characters of Seeley. We're going to see that in the character of Shug Avery. We're going to see how this spiritual transformation comes to fruition, and how she changes her perception of spirituality and God and religion, of how it was and how it will be introduced to her. That is interesting. She even says here, this is the book in which I was able to express a new spiritual awareness, a rebirth into strong feelings of oneness. That this letter is written in is not a very traditional one. This isn't a very traditional narrative structure. Now, the structure of the novel is letters, and that's why it's called an epistolary novel, because epistolary novels they have a structure in which all the novel And all the pages are written in a letter form, which means we don't have that traditional dialogue between characters that keeps going on as it ends. It's just a collection of letters combined, mostly written by the main character Seely, and some of them which are written by her sister Niti from abroad, which they send back and forth to each other. Now, I will just read the beginning, the first page, which says, Dear God. Now we see that here, Seely, the main character, is addressing those letters directly to God. She is not sending them to anyone else. It's like, you can consider it a sort of a diary or a journal where you would write whatever you are doing and whatever you are feeling in it. Now she says, I am only 14 years old. I am, but I am's crossed. I have always been a good girl, which means she doesn't see herself as a good girl anymore. Maybe you can give me a sign. So she's seeking a sign from God, letting me know what is happening to me. So she's in a state where she is in oblivion, she doesn't know what's happening to her, and she's just seeking a sign from God to help her. Now, Seely lives in a very toxic environment where her father abuses her. She takes responsibility of her brothers and sisters that are in the family. As I mentioned, her father is very abusive and bad to them. The mother is absent because she passed away. So what happens here? A man comes by the name of Mr. Dash, and this Mr. Dash is actually, his name in the novel is Mr. Dash. His name is not mentioned because this is a feminist book, and as a feminist she refuses to mention the name of the man who abuses Seely. See, even here on page 6 it says Mr. and there's nothing mentioned. So it isn't until later in the novel itself where we see the name of the man. So this man comes as a suitor, which means he's gonna ask for the hand of either Seely or Niti, and he asked for the hand of Seely because her father thinks that she could listen and she could work like a dog and she could take care of his children. He already has children, Mr. Dash, but he's gonna marry her and so she could take care of the family. Now see, this is the quote I was looking for. It says, she ugly, don't even look like she kin to Niti, but she'll make the better wife, she ain't smart either. I'll just be fair, you have to watch her or she'll give away everything you own. But she can work like a man. How old is she? She near 20, had another thing. She tells lies. So he sees that he describes her as she's ugly, but she can be the better wife because she can work. Now, continuing on, one of my favorite paragraphs in the book, and also it's a scene in the movie, obviously, because the movie was later adapted in 1985. It was directed by Steven Spielberg. It became a big controversy because it was nominated for 11 Oscars, but it didn't win any, unfortunately. But another one is this. It says, this is where the father of Seely wants to show Seely to Mr. Dash. He says, let me see her again. Pa call me Seely, he say. Like it wasn't nothing, Mr. Dash went another look. I go stand in the door. The sun shines in my eyes. He's still up on his horse. He look me up and down. You see, now this is an allegory because Mr. Dash, which later becomes known as Albert, stands, or he's sitting on a horse, and Seely is on the porch looking at him. You see, now he's on a horse and she's standing, which means he's in a higher position. He's going to be more superior than her, because this is like foreshadowing what the relationship is going to be like. it's gonna be like Mr. Albert or Mr. Dash being the upper hand and Seeley being more inferior to him. Now, another thing is that between the letters, there are absence of events, which means there could be some fragmentations, like it's fragmented, it's sewn up into pieces. There's like gap between a letter into another, which means this is one of the features of postmodern books. This is what postmodern literature is like. We have absence of time and place, which means the time and the place in The Color Purple is not directly given to you. It's like given in an indirect way and not in the beginning of the novel also. You will have to read and read and reach a point in the book where you would say, oh, this is the time where we would live in. But here especially, you would tell later in the book, especially in the middle, where a name of a singer is mentioned, and that song by that singer is actually from the 1920s. So you would know this is the book is from the 1920s. I don't know why I'm nervous. I keep making mistakes. And the place, you would find out it's Georgia. So it's giving to you somehow in a secret way. It's not giving to you directly. These are just features of postmodern books, because this was published in 1982. On each letter, but I have to just choose some highlights that I want to read. Additionally, after they get married, obviously, Seeley ends up running from one abusive relationship by her father, who's abusing her, and she goes to another, because Mr. Albert is also abusive. He beats her. He is not a good husband. She works and works and works. She works for him. She works for the children, as if she's a servant, not a wife. But additionally to these characters, we also get introduced to Harpo. Now Harpo is Mr. Dash, Mr. Albert's son, and this Harpo is very, you can say, manly in his physique. Physically, you can consider him a man, but he is weak in will. He is not that confident about his masculinity. Now Harpo falls in love with a woman, and this woman is more strongly willed than him. He meets, who did he meet? He meets, Harpo meets Sophia, yes. He meets Sophia. Now Sophia is strongly built, she's a strong woman, and even though the father dislikes the idea, but they end up getting married. And also, it's an abusive relationship, but this time it's vice versa, because Sophia is the abusive one, and Sophia is the one who beats Harpo. Now, the woman is beating the man because she's strongly just as him. Now, another favorite scene of mine is where they end up fighting, and Sophia goes and talks to Seeley, and Seeley tells her, this life is not worth it. You have to let your man beat you. I mean, it's okay because Mr. Dash beats her too, and she accepts it because this is how she grew up. She didn't stand up for herself. But Sophia defends herself, and she says, no, a better life is coming for us. This life is just full of suffering. And she says, no, I'm not going to accept that. You can think about heaven later. But besides that, Harpo ends up building a juke joint, which is like a bar of singing and dancing and drinking, near the house, which they go to. And who do they bring? We get introduced to another character, which is Shug Avery. Now, Shug Avery is the lover of Mr. Albert. She's a singer, she's from out of town, and she travels a lot. And she gets sick, and Albert goes to see her, and he brings her actually home. And the thing is, Seeley's not that much interested in Mr. Albert already, because she knows he's cheating on her. She gets excited. She even has this picture, and she falls in love with her. She's such a beautiful woman. She has beautiful skin, and she cannot wait until she brings home. So Mr. Dash brings her as she is sick, and Seeley takes care of her until Shug Avery is fine. And this is where we somewhat see of the beginning of this transformation that Seeley is going through. Because Shug Avery is going to be a big influence on Seeley, because she's going to change her mentality about a lot of things. The role in Seeley's life, because Shug is the one who introduces her to many things. She's the one who nurtures her, nourishes her to be more physically, spiritually, psychologically developed and well. Now also, we have two women in the story. Now we already had Sophia, but Shug plays more of a major role in Seeley's life. Now we have two women supporting each other, because at the beginning she didn't like her, she didn't know what she was like, but as she took care of Shug Avery, and she was very grateful that she did so, they bonded and they became close friends. All this while Shug Avery was with Mr. Albert, cheating with her on Seeley. What am I saying? Yeah. Cheating on Seeley with Shug Avery. Yes. But now a big change happens in the story, obviously, and this is like towards the middle. This is where she knows that she's receiving emails. Why did I say emails? I meant letters. Now, what is really mesmerizing here is the differences between the languages that Seeley uses and Nitti uses, because Seeley's uneducated. Her sister taught her a few things about reading and writing. You can see how well these letters are written when she writes them to God. They're like written in African American vernacular language, which is like street language when you speak. She writes them like that. But on the contrary, we see that the letters that are sent by Nitti are very beautifully written. The descriptions are amazing. There are no grammatical mistakes. And we see this parallel, and we see this exchange of letters, where Seeley then advances and starts to write even more beautifully. As she stays with Shug Avery, she starts reading the letters. Anyhow, the story with Nitti is very long. I'm not going to focus on that. But we know that Nitti is in Africa. She's on a mission sent by the church, where she's explaining what happens to the people, how the colonizers come and they try to destroy the village and they try to invade. Towards the end, where she stands up for herself. That's one of my favorite scenes actually in the movie too, because you have to watch the film. The film is amazing. Where Shug persuades Seeley to leave Mr. Dash and come with her to Tennessee, and this is where she stands up finally for herself, and she says that you have done me wrong all these years, and I will no longer bear this, and I'm going to leave you. And she does, and she leaves, and she stays with Shug Avery while she's in town. What happens towards the end is that Seeley goes and stays with Shug Avery. She leaves Albert or Mr. Dash, and we experience that Seeley has changed. She has become stronger. She has become braver. On the contrary to the Seeley that we got introduced to at the beginning, because she was shy, she was abused, she lived in a toxic family environment, then into a toxic marriage, but she managed, with the support of women like Sophia and women like Shug Avery, to change. And her perception of spirituality even changed. Like, she does not any longer see this higher entity or God as something she knew before. She sees it in nature, in everything that is surrounded by her. Like, it is sort of an experience. But towards the end, in the last message, where Nitti sends her this letter and tells her that she is soon coming, and that is one of the most beautiful scenes, even in the movie and even as you read it in the book, where she says, "Dear God, dear stars, dear trees, dear sky, dear people, dear everything, dear God." And she writes this a page, a 3-page letter at the end. And she even concludes it with Amen or Amin. But what I like is that even though this book was banned, was seen as controversial, and critics somewhat did not like it because it was too explicit, too obscene, it portrayed a stereotype of men, but what they don't see is that this book is beautiful, especially for us that read literature and studied at school. I personally saw this and I was very mesmerized when I read it. I read it once, then for the final exams I read it once again, because it was just, I don't know, I should have just revised it for the exam, but I ended up reading it again because it was such a page turner, which was, oh my god, this book is so delicious, I'm gonna keep turning pages and read it. But, however, Alice Walker managed to show something this beautiful. She managed to show someone, an individual, a woman, going through this transformation of self. She is self-realizing. This is what we call self-realization. She's going through this transformation of self, and she's rediscovering herself, and she's reevaluating what she has decided, she has been through, and decided to move on. Even though at the beginning she doesn't end up killing Mr. Albert, nothing happens to him, and she even gets to know him as a friend once again. But he realizes the mistakes that he has done and the wrongs he has done against her. But she has moved on because she's a strong person. That's why I really love this book, because it's showcasing how women are standing up for other women, because Celie would not have changed, would not have transformed, would not have viewed her life and reevaluated it without the help of Shug Avery, without the help of Sophia, who ends up in jail because she refuses to be a servant for the mayor's wife. Anyhow, this is just beautiful. I definitely recommend it, even though you might get shocked towards the beginning of because there are definitely explicit language, there are definitely things that are very shocking and real in the book, sometimes too much real, but overall the writing is amazing. The characters are introduced are so fun to follow and catch up with. I recommend even watching the film, even though it didn't win any of those 11 Oscar nominations, but I thought it was very deserving. It is such a beautiful portrayal of African American literature, and especially African American culture by itself, especially African American women too. Yeah, that's it. Maybe next time I'll introduce you guys to another book, to those 5 people who are actually watching. But yeah, thank you.